Why don't you go ahead and take us into Washington and let's kind of go through the keys to victory for Washington. How does this offense succeed against this? I mean, it really is a matchup of an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object, isn't it?
It really is. I think that Washington's offense versus Michigan's defense is the matchup that we are so itching to watch,
Yeah.
right? More so than the other side of the football. I think that the other side of the football could decide the game, when we see Michigan's offense versus Washington's defense. But the Michigan's defense versus Washington's offense is the strength on strength. That's what we really, as college football fans, are really excited to see. And I'm going to pull up these stats here. So you can see I got these stats from covers.com, and it kind of shows you what the offensive ranks are. And I'm actually on the wrong one. I don't know. So the offensive ranks for Washington here versus the defensive ranks of Michigan. Now, that's a lot of green in that right column if you're watching on video. That's defense for Michigan, and they are top 10 in almost every category, right?
Yeah.
The main focus and the one thing that Washington's actually better in is passing yards per game on offense versus they're at 357.3 versus Michigan's passing yards allowed on defense, which is second in the country, right? Washington's first in the country on offense, and Michigan's second in the country on defense. So you're kind of splitting hairs there, but when we see this sort of matchup and you say, all right, we've got a really good secondary, right? And we're going to match up really well against these wide receivers. Well, no, you're not, right? How many times have we seen this happen where you've got three potential, top 3 round talents in the NFL, top 2 round talents on one side of the ball? They almost always win that matchup, right? I don't care if you're playing zone, which is what Michigan's going to try to do here. That side of the football always wins. They know
Yeah.
they know the route they're running. They know where the ball's going. They know what their quarterback is doing. They've played together for a while now at this point. So I know that the stats show that Washington only has a slight edge in passing to Michigan's defense, but I think it's a bit more than that. And I think that's where Washington's going to win this game, and if they do win this game, it's going to be a phenomenal performance by Michael Penix and by
Yeah.
the Washington team, and a historical performance. I mean, this is for them to do what they've done this year. If they end up winning this game, it's going to be special. But going back to the numbers, rushing wise, I think that Washington's going to have to get creative with Penix running the football and just say, hey, man, it's your last game in college. We don't want you to get hurt, but you got a hurt running back and Dylan Johnson back there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Second string running back doesn't have a ton of snaps behind him, which that affects rushing and that affects your pass blocking. And you're as a runner, protecting the quarterback. So I'm a little bit nervous in that sense. They're not going to be able to run the ball as well. And I think that they're going to do just like they did when Dylan Johnson got hurt in last game against Texas. And they're going to run Penix a little bit more and get creative. And he's got the legs to do it. We've seen him evading pass rushes all season long. And we just haven't seen him do it across the line of scrimmage. He usually finds an open receiver, and he'll have more trouble than he's had all season long, I think, to find open receivers because Michigan, I mean, they do a great job. They play a lot of zone. They've got the guys in the backfield to do it. But at the end of the day, I like those three receivers to get the job done for Washington. And also don't count out Jack Westover, their tight end, who had a really great game against Texas. One of his best games, probably his best game, maybe not statistically, but in how he looked and how he performed. I thought he had a really good game, and I think that he'll be another important role in this game because it's possible to play zone and cover three guys, especially as deep threats, but you're leaving someone underneath if you're doing that. You can't cover four receivers playing zone, like not realistically, not consistently at least. So I think that you could see him having some success, and then probably Polk or McMillan, one of the two, also being sort of that catalyst there. But At the end of the day, I do give Washington's offense the edge in this matchup against Michigan's defense. Not because their 11 are better than Michigan's 11. I don't necessarily believe that, but like you said, starting off the program, styles make fights. And I
Mhm.
think that Washington knows their identity more, and they're more efficient at it, and they have the right players in the right position. What
Yeah.
say you, man?
Well, I agree with a lot of the things that you were saying, and sticking to without going into the Michigan defense, because we'll get to that in a minute. But um, this Washington offense, I think a key to victory is to figure out a way to run the football. You've got to figure out a way to run the football in some sort of way and be effective doing that, because I think that this, and I said I don't want to get too far into the Michigan defense because we're going to talk about them, but I think that in this situation as a Michigan defense, you've got to kind of dare Washington to run the football. I think that that's kind of a goal as a unit. And on the other hand of that, Washington is, I think they're going to get a lot of good fronts to run against. I think that they're going to be given a lot of fronts to run against. Are those offensive guards going to be able to create space and get to a second level and get a second level block on a pull? That's really what I'm interested in, because I don't think Michigan's stacking the line of scrimmage against this offense.
Mhm.
That's not, I don't think that's a recipe for success. You bring guys. Michael Penix is so damn good at throwing behind a blitz. He recognizes the blitz immediately. He knows where there's going to be a hole due to, you bringing extra defenders. And so um, I don't think that's a recipe for success for the Michigan defense. And with that being said, I think that Washington's offense has got to figure out a way to run the football. Now, we talked about the running back, okay, and he was just really he was really just getting going. Dylan Johnson, if you don't know, was a transfer running back from Mississippi State last season, and he really, really started to leave his mark on this offense later in the season. And now he's hurt. I guess the scans have come back negative, is from what I understand, and the mystery just kind of has to wait until game time. But from what I'm reading from that situation and from what I saw in that game, I don't know, man. That looked like a pretty rough injury to me.
Yeah, no way that he's 80% even.
Yeah. So with that being said, somebody's got to step up, man. It's next man up. I mean, this is the 15th game of the year. Everybody's got players that are hurt, and so somebody's got to step up and help run the ball effectively. As far as the rest of this offense goes, this offensive line is really good, and Michael Penix really complements them well in the fact that he can move around the pocket, dude. He is elusive as shit around the
Yeah.
pocket. I mean, he is just slimy as hell. Cannot get him down. Can't get your hand on him. I mean, Texas in the Sugar Bowl, I thought did a good job of shedding blocks and creating a little bit of pressure, but it was just too late. Penix was just, I mean, he was one step ahead the whole time. Texas recorded 0 sacks. So Washington's got to repeat that. They've got to rinse, lather, repeat. They got to do that again. That's
Yeah.
a key to success in this game, is keep Penix off the ground, and furthermore, keep his eyes downfield, because these wide receivers are going to make plays. And Michael Penix possesses the ability to, even if they're not open, throw them open. And we've seen it in national championship games and high caliber college football teams over the last few years. You've got to have dynamic playmakers on the ends, at wide receiver, tight end, and I think they've got all that. I think they've got that in spades. I think this is one of the best skill groups as far as pass catchers that I've ever seen in college football. So if they can figure out a way to establish the run and protect Michael Penix as they have all year, I think that this offense is going to fare well against this Michigan defense. Um, anything else you got on that Washington offense before we
Well,
move on?
I thought that you brought up an interesting point about the running back, and the backup running back. You know, how many times do we see, or have we seen in a lot of sports, but in football in particular, and even at running back in particular, um, examples of players having to step up and fill a role, and play better than they ever have,
Mhm.
in big key moments, and um, I'm not putting it past, their second string running back, and I'm blanking on his name right now, but their Washington second string running back averaged 5.5 yards per carry against Texas,
Mhm.
who is really good. Maybe not as good as Michigan at stopping the run, but they're top five, I believe, at stopping the run.
They are.
Um,
Yeah.
it might even be better than Michigan now that I look at their stats. Their
I
rushing
think they're
yards are
better up the
six.
middle.
Yeah,
Texas is better up the middle with Byron Murphy. I mean, come on. And they
right.
said that dude's about to run a 4.8 at the combine. I mean, give me
That's
a break.
ridiculous.
I
He's
mean,
way too big.
that's absolutely absurd. It's like being hit by a car. Now, Michigan's defense, we'll get to that in a minute, but they're better off the edge for sure
Mhm.
than Texas, and
Yeah.
that's what concerns me a little bit as far as this Washington team. They just need to give Michael Penix time, man, and let him cook. And it's going to be easier said than done. But as I said, those wide receivers have an inept ability of being able to back off a team's pass rushers, dude.
Yeah.
Because if you rush from one side, guess where the ball's going?
Mhm.
Right over your friggin' head.
But,
It's
one stat you mentioned Michigan coming off the edge. One stat that I didn't put up here is, Michigan's got 37 sacks on the year.
mm,
Um, that's or excuse me, their ranking is 37th. They average 2.7 per game. That's including the Alabama game where
I
they
think
just
they
went
have
off.
32 for the year. I think.
Okay. I knew it was in the 30s, but their ranking is 37.
Hmm.
Um, Washington, and we did mention this, but they've only given up 6 sacks, right? A part of that is due to Michael Penix. I'm sorry, I'm reading this wrong, y'all. They are sixth in the country in sacks. They've given up less than a sack per game, so they're at I believe it's like
13.
13 out of
Yeah.
14
And they've
games.
been at 13
Um,
for like a few weeks.
right, right. So I apologize for that, but the point is 37th in the country for Michigan. It's a lot higher than I thought they would be, as far as like a higher number. I thought that they would be in the teens in sack rate. That's not great,
No.
considering that they just had six, I believe, against Alabama, or seven.
Yeah, it was a
Um,
5 or 6, 7 something.
I know it was five in the first half, so
Phew.
I think they ended up getting to seven. But that's the difference. Alabama's been doing that all year, right? You
Yeah.
know what Washington's done all year? Kept their quarterback upright. I think that Washington is going to protect Penix quite well, especially if he's a threat to run.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, if the inside of that line for Washington held up against the interior defensive line of Texas, I don't think they're going to have a problem with Michigan. And I don't have issues with the tackles for Washington at all. I don't have any concern about those guys at all. It was the interior of the offensive line minus the center that got replaced and overhauled in this offseason, and it was an area of concern. And there was times this year that it wasn't beautiful, but it never was to the detriment, obviously, of the undefeated Huskies. Let's uh, and I'm glad you brought up sacks because I forgot to bring up those numbers, but let's talk about this Washington defense versus this Michigan offense. This Washington defense has been opportune. They've had opportune timing. They've come up with stops whenever they've really needed it. They were unhealthy for a large part of the year, especially in the back end of that secondary. Your safeties were hurt, and now that they've gotten healthy, man,
Mhm.
it's been a lot tougher for teams to even a team like Texas, who, man, Quinn Ewers had like 100 yards in the first half, dude. I mean, and this is a pretty damn good passing offense that we're talking about with Texas. So this defense has really bowed their neck. They're going to be tested on the lines of scrimmage, and arguably Michigan has been the best line of scrimmage team all year. They're there is not a chink in the armor, really. They've been able to run the football effectively. Michigan's offense, we're going to talk about in a second. They don't average 1,000 yards a game or something. Obviously, that's hyperbole, but they're averaging 300 and something yards a game. So I think that if Washington can get Michigan in obvious passing downs, and what that's going to entail is limiting them on first and second down. That's where that battle is won. You've got to get them in 3rd and 8 or longer. And I think that that's enough to at least get this Michigan offense, off of their game plan, off of their rhythm, and get them punting the football. Special teams wasn't a great category for Michigan last week last week in the Rose Bowl against Alabama. Maybe that plays a role in this game. But the whole point is, first and second down, Washington's got to bow up. And I think they're going to be able to bring guys down on the line and do that. And I believe this secondary can hold up. Now, Roman Wilson is, Roman Wilson. And I think that he's actually kind of emerging right now. But what is your thoughts? And do you have any stats to kind of back up, our thoughts on this Washington defense? I think it's a lot better than what people think it is.
Well, and I think it's important, the way you led that off, talking about the injuries that they've had on the back end of that defense. Those guys didn't show up and play until the Pac-12 championship game, and they were lights out. They were a big reason why Washington won that game the second time around. They weren't there for the first game, right? Unless I'm missing something. I don't think that both of them were there. Maybe one of them were there, but they were out for a lot of the majority of the season, and they come back against Oregon, and that's what opened my eyes up. And I said, okay, this is a complete defense now. Is it the best in the country? Obviously not, but it's a complete defense now, and they've been playing like that, and it's been really fun to watch. Going to Michigan's offense, I also saw some things from J.J. McCarthy that I really liked in the last game against Alabama. I was concerned about his ability to pass the ball, 30 times a game, and I think he ended up with I think he was 27 or 35, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
something like that. But had a pretty great game, by his standards, and showed that if he needs to pass the football, he can to win the game for Michigan. And I thought that was a pretty important stat and a pretty important key to victory for Michigan, and for this offensive unit to succeed. I think that he has got to be able to be a threat downfield. And I think he has to be taken seriously now after the last performance that he had, that kind of throws a wrench in the plan of what Washington would have wanted to do without seeing that game, I think.
Yeah.
And maybe you have to change things up just a little bit, but I think that Washington is able to accept that challenge, with their defenders on the back end. That you still look at Michigan's pass catchers, and I like Morgan a lot, the true freshman. He's dynamic. I like what he brings, and I like Roman Wilson a lot. And also Loveland, the tight end. I think that he does a pretty good job. But none of those guys scream like first round talent to me right now. So I think it's manageable by this Washington secondary, who I keep seeing people talking about how there's no way that they, on the back end are able to cover Michigan and slow down the Michigan offense, but they're basing it off of stats from the entire season, not stats with their starters in. If you focus on those stats, they'll do a pretty good job of defending the passing attack. Now, moving to the rushing attack for Michigan. Michigan isn't great efficiency wise when it comes to rushing the football. They're averaging less than 160 yards per game, and actually Washington, based on these stats on screen right here, they match up favorably. I honestly thought that Michigan would have an advantage when it comes to running the football, but based on these statistics, Washington does a pretty good job of limiting that. And Michigan is pretty average when it comes to rushing the football. I think that when you see Blake Corum, and due to the lack of weapons that they have on the outside, you see him with a lot of swing passes, and you sort of equate that when you're watching the football game to running the football, but he's actually catching balls out of the backfield. So maybe that changes the dynamic of the rushing yards. But they also, when they go to Blake Corum, a lot of his attempts come on like almost forcing him to run, like even if it's not there, they're like, hey, it'll come, like we're still gonna give him the football. Him and Donovan Edwards both, who I think Edwards has had a pretty lackluster performance by his own standards, but
yeah, pretty rough year.
Yeah, for him this year, but they haven't really given up on him either in some ways. And they certainly don't give up on Blake Corum. They just try to get that guy the football because he's just, he makes plays. With enough attempts, he's probably gonna hurt you and gash you for some yards. But yeah, I think that Washington's defense matches up pretty favorably, a lot better than what some of the national media is telling us, and how Michigan is just such a better team that they should dominate and cover in this game. I know that I'm giving you more examples for Washington to win this game than Michigan to win. So I do want to say that I think that Michigan obviously has a clear chance to win the game. They're favored in the game for a reason. But the way that Washington is set up, I think that a lot of people are missing the what Washington has been able to do. And a lot of people are going in doubting them, again this year. And I don't want to be one of those guys who doubts Washington again, and is which I didn't last week, but I did against Oregon both times. And, that they have bit me a few times at least. And I think that they have a really good shot to win this game.
Well, and I think it's fair also to say that Washington has played a lot better offenses than what Michigan has played this year. I mean, can we honestly say that? I mean, the Big Ten, let's be real. The Big Ten West, there wasn't a team in that whole side of the division this year that averaged over 25 points for the year. Yeah. Not one team, not one. I mean, so for God's sakes, Michigan played Iowa in the conference championship game. I mean, that's like a big strike on your resume as far as playing a team that has an offense. I mean, my God. That you talk about no offense.
I mean,
we could play receiver. You and right. We could train for a year and go play receiver for Iowa. I mean, it's that bad.
And if you really look at it, if you look at their season, what were the two big games that Michigan played? Penn State and Ohio State. Where's their offense at? Right. Yeah, I mean, Maryland was the best offense that they faced all year.
And Maryland threw for almost 300 yards on this defense.
Right. And they're nowhere near what Washington is. We're trying to tell y'all, folks, it's about the matchups in these games.
Yeah.
And Washington is a matchup problem for almost everybody, like literally everybody. Like when you have that many stud wide receivers, not to hijack your point, Mark, but it's tough to match up with a team like that. And it's been that way for the past 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a new age of college football. I mean, we watched Nick Saban bring this element of college football in a few years ago, and I mean, just tore people up with it. I mean, you talk about the 2020 Alabama offense. I mean, just absolutely high flying. We saw LSU in 2019. We've seen Ohio State over that time have some teams like that. So, look, when you've got game breakers at wide receiver, they can be exactly that in a game like this. They can break this. They can just break it wide open, man.